explainer, my colleague, is in conversation with the Narendran, Managing Director at Tata Steel. So let's cut across.
That is one. Second factor which will impact prices is what's happening in China. China last year has not been as bad as we had imagined. In fact, originally we had projected, the World Steel Association had projected that consumption of steel in China will shrink. It has actually grown by 1%. And a 1% swing in China has a big impact because that's, that's a significant amount. It's 9 million tons. So we're watching and waiting and watching, seeing what's happening in China. Things are more positive than we had imagined. And China is expected to export less this year than they did last year. I think last year was peak at around 120 million tons. This year maybe closer to 100 million. Because for a long time, China has been exporting 50, 60 million tons. So if they were only exporting that much, honestly, the balance would come back to the world steel industry.
Okay, fair enough. NPA and the debt situation is something which has been a big concern for the steel sector as a whole. Where do you stand in terms of your debt reduction plan? And as you enter FY18, by how much can you bring down debt? What's the strategy right now?
I won't comment at a specific level, but directionally all I can tell you is most of the big expenditure is behind us as far as Kalinganagar is concerned. So we are back to a normal level of spending, and we think our cash flows will be better than that, and that should help us bring down the debt, but how much, etc., I wouldn't like to comment just now.
Okay, fair enough. As far as the European operations are concerned, I understand that you wouldn't want to go into the details, but there have been some reports, Naren, on ThyssenKrupp pulling out of the likely discussions and the tentative discussions with Tata Steel. Can you tell us or give some clarity, are the discussions with Thyssen still on?
The discussions are still on. I think there were some comments from the unions in Thyssen, but as far as Thyssen is concerned, the management of Thyssen and management of Tata Steel continue to talk to each other.
Okay. As far as very last question on the demand scenario, I agree that there has been some form of a pickup, but how sustainable is the demand pickup in the sector?
I think a lot will,
and even from a foreign perspective.
Okay, globally, the exciting areas are India and Southeast Asia, if you look at it from a global perspective, because these are 70 to 80 million tons of consumption of steel growing at 7-8%. China, like I said, was expected to shrink, but if it is from -1 to +1, that's a 15 million swing, right? So China is not shrinking as much as one had imagined. In fact, it's growing positive. What has been interesting is Russia, CIS, which is Russia, Ukraine, etc., are starting to do better than before. Latin America is still struggling, but I think the worst is behind us in Latin America. There's a lot of interest in US because the Trump administration has announced that they're going to spend a lot on infrastructure. And if the US, which is again a huge market for steel, starts picking up, which has been shrinking for the last 2 years. It has been shrinking primarily because of oil prices and the investments coming down in shale gas. But if infrastructure expenditure in the US picks up, that's very good for the steel industry. Europe is also slowly picking up. It's on positive growth. So globally, the steel industry or the World Steel Association feels that the worst is behind us. The concern areas, maybe countries like Korea, where the steel consumption is shrinking. So that's where it is. I think most regions which are shrinking are no longer shrinking, and most regions which are not growing are starting to grow. So I think overall, directionally, we think it's positive. But having said that, I don't want to get too much of optimism because there's also a lot of excess capacity floating around.
Okay. Yeah? Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Narendran.